My name is Chris Bailey. Welcome to Shed Talks Recovery. I'm a man in long-term recovery, and what that means for me is that I've been able to resolve my problematic relationship with drugs and alcohol, and sustain that since August 7th of 1997. I'm developing this channel with the drive to contact individuals that are recovery curious, for those that are in recovery, or those that may have family members that are in recovery. I'm a certified recovery support specialist, and I've done a lot of program development and co-chair work at the state and national levels. Um, I'm a qualified peer supervisor and a subject matter expert, not just on addiction, but on recovery. And my hope is to develop this channel in attracting a tribe of individuals that are looking at trying to manage and develop not only their own recovery, but to help others in their recovery. And I hope that you choose to join me for further Shed Talks. This is the Shed. This is where we'll recover. But please smash the like button and subscribe. And make sure to let me know in the comments below if you're interested. I really want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Hey, welcome to Shed Talks, where we talk about recovery in a shed. I'm Chris Bailey. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and what that means for me is I've been able to resolve my problematic relationship with drugs and alcohol, for over 25 years now. And what I want to do in this first installment is discuss with you all about the idea of what recovery is, and common conceptions around recovery, but also how we can define those things. If you're recovery curious, if you're in recovery, if you are trying to help a family member in recovery, subscribe, hit the like button, and comment. Comments help give me and drive content, so I know what you all are looking for. In terms of recovery, there is a good deal of opinions that are developed around that, where people feel like there's only one way to recover, and that's usually, through an 12-step orientation. And as a matter of fact, early on in my own recovery, I felt that way, that was the only way to recover. But there are many paths to the same peak, right? And there's no one particular way to recover. And I'm going to say something controversial here, because I include harm reduction in recovery. I believe that belongs in the spectrum of recovery. I believe that it is a pathway of recovery. And I feel like, excluding that actually stigmatizes individuals that are trying to diminish the harm that using drugs has on their life. And abstinence is not just the only way to go with that. So, there are many paths to the same peak. And the key here is that recovery, getting into recovery, is an action of identification. It's not a label that's put on you, oh, you're in recovery. It really boils down to the idea that I identify that I am in recovery. I am in recovery. And I have the means and the right to define what that means for me. But what I want to highlight here is the term, what does it mean to recover? Most people tend to look at recovery as something that entails a stay in a hospital room or going through PT, that you get your dose of treatment, your 30, 60, or 90 days of treatment, and you're clean. That's a very clinical way of looking at recovery. And the idea that's born out of that is very, very damaging in a lot of ways. And it's damaging for a few reasons. It's damaging because it denies the fact that recovery is chronic. That idea has a very what's called an acute care perspective. Treating someone's addiction like it's a broken arm denies the fact that this is something they're going to have to wrestle with the rest of their life. Just based off of neurobiology, it's something they're going to have to deal with the rest of their life. Secondly, it really opens up the door to drastic and really, really negative effects, socially speaking, clinically speaking, and in terms of public views on what is commonly referred to as relapse. I'm very averse to using that term. I think it's very stigmatizing. I use the term a recurrence of use or recurrence to use or recurrence of symptoms. The idea for recovery is that as we're in recovery, we aren't recovering inside of a hospital or inside of a rehab or inside of an OT. Recovery really is that we are getting something back. We are returning something to ourselves. In some cases, that's self respect. In some cases, that's sanity. In some cases, that is a manageability around our life. And there are a kind of identifiable stages of recovery. There's an initiation when we're getting started with recovery, stabilizing. Our moods are trying to stabilize, our minds are trying to stabilize. We'll get into this in later videos. Um, then there's the stabilization where we start to stabilize in recovery. This is all pulled from a paper by a guy named Bill White. If you are interested, you can look online for him. He was pivotal in the development of peer recovery support. But the third stage is maintenance. We have to maintain that recovery, and then we get into thriving or an improved quality of life. And with regard to recovery, it really is about digging for those buried treasures that we buried with all of the damage and the detritus and the dirt that we kicked up during our addiction. And in some cases, it really boils down to the fact that we have to recognize that we're discovering things about ourselves that we may not even, we're getting things back that we didn't even know we lost in the first place. The third piece of this is in understanding addiction. For many of us, not all of us, but for many of us, our addiction is the result of a maladaptive coping mechanism. For many of us, we got involved with using as a way of addressing trauma, negative aspects, negative emotions in our own life. And it, I often say it kept me from blowing my head off until it became the reason I wanted to blow my head off. And uh, what I mean by that is during my addiction, I had, in the inception of it, the beginning of it, I had all these negative emotions floating around. I had a lot of chaos that I was dealing with. I had so many different maladaptive coping skills that were put into my blueprint early on in my life. And I'll get into blueprints later. But it really boils down to this understanding that as I pulled in to using, what I realized is that I had bliss on tap. I had oblivion on tap. I could summon whatever emotion or state of mind I wanted to be in for that day with a little bit of money and some tools to use it with. And what I was really doing was outsourcing my growth onto the drugs. And my relationship to the drugs grew, but I didn't grow. I wasn't growing at all. There was no emotional flexibility. There was no emotional resiliency. There was no ability for me to bounce back. As such, um, I had a major, major addiction develop because the more chaotic, the more negative, the more awful I felt. And conversely, the more positive, the more I wanted to improve the experience I was having, the more I wanted to enjoy what was going on. Drugs were present on both ends of that spectrum. And then right in the middle, when I was bored or I had nothing to do or I was feeling like I was living inside my head, I could summon those emotions by using a chemical. And that addiction grew, but there was no growth in me. So when I got into recovery, there was a lot of work that I had to do, inner work, that emotional, psychological and spiritual work that I had to do in order to grow. And that growth was slow. But because it was slow, it was real. There was real change happening. And we'll get into that in subsequent videos. So, um, you know, the question for those of you that are recovery curious is really, what do you think you're going to get back if you enter into recovery? What is it that you think you're going to get back? What are you going to uncover? The second question for you is, what's stopping you from making that decision? What is stopping you from making that decision? I want to highlight here the word decide. I'm kind of a word geek. And so, in making a decision, the word decide literally means to cut off. It means to cut off an old way or to cut off a pathway or to cut off something so that there's only one way to move. And so a decision's a big, big fucking deal, right? It is not something to be taken lightly, and they're hard. Decisions are really hard. So what is it that is stopping you from making that decision? I feel like um, for many of us, it's the fear of the unknown. It's not just fear that we can do it or that we're going to fail. It's fear of what's coming down the line. And sometimes for us, it's fear of feeling. We are terrified of our own emotional life. We're terrified of our own psychology. And a walk through our heads feels like a walk through a haunted house. So, those are questions that I wanted to pose for you all that are recovery curious. For those that if you're in recovery, what is it that has come back into your life? What is it that you've discovered about yourself that you didn't know before? What is it that you um, recognize as having been present in your life, disappeared during your addiction, and came back? For some of us, that can be our conscience, right? Which I really look at as being an unoccluded voice of my higher power, um, whatever that may mean. Um, my conscience is something that tells me what the right thing is to do. Um, and I didn't have a conscience during my addiction. I mean, I did when I would come off the high, but while I was high, man, it was like a chemically induced sociopathy. I mean, to be really honest. And so, for us in recovery, it's really taking stock at that. And that is a great gratitude practice. Gratitude is something that can keep us rooted in the present moment, irrespective of all the various things, the horrible things that are going on in our life. If I can stay rooted in that gratitude, even when things are hard, there's a gateway for me to be able to set the tone for my day where I'm not getting tossed around by the storm, but that old adage, I become the center of it and the calmest part of that storm, where I'm actually anchoring a whole lot of order and manageability in myself so that I don't feel like I have to control all this other chaos that's going on around me. For those of you that are working with family members that are, uh, look, you want to help get into recovery and you can see them suffering in their addiction. What is it that they have lost to their addiction? What was it something that they had before that was special, that made them unique, that caused them to create relationships that were deep and filled with love, that you love about that person, that has evaporated since they came into recovery, has been buried with their addiction. Um, and really take stock of that, because I want to do a special video for you all on how to have conversations with people. Most people feel like having conversations around a person's addiction is forbidden, that they can't do that. It's going to explode into a fight. There are ways and tactics we can have those conversations with people and remind them not just of who they were, but who they can become. We can have conversations that are pregnant with hope with these individuals and really work at inspiring an understanding that we believe in them and we want them to be able to recover, and that will support that. So that's our first installment today for YouTube. If there's content that you'd like to see me develop or topics that you'd like to see me address, drop them in the chat. I mean, in the comments, not in the chat, but drop them in the comments. And maybe at some point we can do a live on YouTube and have some discussions with each other live and direct. But until then, stay centered, stay grounded, and recover. Thanks for joining me on the Shed Talks.